So today we were very happy to have Markus Anders here, who will tell us about efficient algorithms for symmetry detection. Markus, please take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about symmetry today, and we all have this intuitive understanding of symmetry. Of course, you've not seen this joke before. This is what we're not talking about. So we're talking about the graph isomorphism problem. In the graph isomorphism problem, the question is whether there is a bijection of the first graph to the vertices of the second graph, which preserves the structure of the graph. So edges must go to edges, and non-edges must go to non-edges. And this is a very intuitive concept. So if we look at this visually, you move the vertices of the first graph to the vertices of the second graph, and the structure of the graph must be preserved. So the edges are preserved under this bijection. Now, this is not really symmetries, but we can use the notion of graph isomorphism to define symmetries of a graph. Instead of talking about two graphs, we now talk about one graph. When we commute the vertices of one graph, and this is supposed to be an isomorphism of this graph, which is why we call it an automorphism. Again, visually, it's quite apparent. You move around the vertices of a graph, and the structure of the graph must be preserved. So isomorphism and automorphisms are a notion of structural equivalence of these graphs. All right. So, okay, so here, for the symmetries of a graph, I sort of have to specify what we're interested in. So usually we're not just interested in one automorphism, but we're interested in all of the automorphisms of a graph. However, it's quite easy to see that if you look at the set of all automorphisms of a graph, that this can be of exponential size in the order of the graph. So the graph to think about would be the complete graph. The complete graph has edges everywhere. So any possible permutation of that graph will be structure preserving because there are edges everywhere. So there can be n factorial number of symmetries in the number of vertices n. But this is kind of computationally challenging because we cannot enumerate this set for all graphs because it's just infeasible. Now, luckily, these automorphisms form a permutation group under the composition operation. And what does that mean? That means if you have two given automorphisms, two symmetries, you can compose them and get another symmetry of the graph. So you first apply the first one, then the second one, and their composition will also be a symmetry. Just follows directly from the definition. And so the idea is to not just write down all of the symmetries, but the smallest set which suffices to generate all of the symmetries. So if you apply this composition operation exhaustively to this given subset, you will get all of the automorphisms. So this is called a generating set, and we can always write down a small generating set. So we can always write down a set of size n and log n, roughly. And so the problem definition for symmetry detection is this. We get as input a graph, and as output, we only want one such a smaller subset which generates the entire automorphism. So this notation here, these angle brackets, this means exhaustively apply composition. And then you're supposed to get all of the automorphisms. Okay, and so this talk is about efficient practical algorithms for this problem. Now,
question is, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but is there any notion of like almost solving this from like if I get many of the generators, but maybe not quite all, like would that make you happy? Or it's like here it's all or nothing?
So like a randomized algorithm.
Well, no, I don't know, but maybe I'm able to find generate somehow in some sense large parts of the group where I really don't know what I'm talking about. But or now we should think about really a representation of the automorphism group, period.
So quite commonly the way you deal with these groups so if you are given the generators would be the random Schreier-Sims algorithm, which is essentially, so it doesn't guarantee you that you're representing the entire group, but it's randomized. So you have a fixed probability that it is the entire group. So it's quite common to actually use randomization in this context.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we'll get back to that a lot during this talk. All right, so why should we even care about this problem? So why is this even interesting? And so if we look at the applications of of graph isomorphism, there's actually quite a few. So it's used in computational solvers like SAT, integer programming, SMT. It's used in computer vision and computer graphics, in mathematics in general, when you're interested in certain properties, and the list is basically endless. There's lots of applications. And why is that the case? So why are there so many applications? This is because we can efficiently model objects as graphs. Now, what do I mean? So here, for example, I have a Boolean formula. This would be CNF. This would be a formula you would see, for example, in SAT. And we can efficiently model this formula as a graph. Now, how does that work? We first make a vertex for each literal of the graph and connect them via an edge. And then we add vertices for the clauses of the CNF. So we take the first one, x1 and not y1. We connect it to the respective literals. And we do that for all clauses of this formula. And then I should be coloring these different from the literals, but it's not that important right now. But the point is that the symmetries of the graph are precisely the syntactic symmetries of this formula. So instead of having like a tailored algorithm for this formula, you can just make the graph, compute the symmetries of the graph, and then you get the symmetries of the syntactic symmetries of the formula. And this doesn't just work with SAT and CNF, this works with all kinds of combinatorial objects. So if you have, for example, a computational instance of some problem, probably you can model this as a graph and compute the symmetries using graph isomorphism. And then, of course, the idea is that you can then make use of the symmetries in a certain application in a certain way. But this is a super tricky problem on its own, and I'm not going to talk about it in this talk. So this would be the symmetry exploitation. All right. You can also formalize this a little bit. So there's this classic result by Miller, which says that the isomorphism problem of finite relational structure reduces to the isomorphism problem of graphs, and also vice versa. And these finite relational structures, you can just think of this as a very expressive combinatorial object. And so this directly implies that you can also reduce objects like directed graphs, hypergraphs, colored graphs, and the list is very long. So the idea is here that you can sort of build graph gadgets which model like richer structures. And so you can most of the time reduce your problem to solving graph isomorphism or to detecting symmetries of graphs. But this is sort of the wrong way around, because graphs are not, they don't seem that expressive on the surface level, but again, this modeling just works. All right. So now I've kind of argued that we can focus on graphs.
So like graph isomorphism is in some moral sense complete for the class of all symmetry detection problems.
Yes. So, yeah, exactly. So this is one complexity class. It's called the GI complete problems. These are problems that are polynomial time equivalent to the graph isomorphism problem. I also have this on this next slide here. So these bubbles mean polynomial time equivalent problems. So there's a polynomial time Turing reduction from, for example, graph isomorphism to symmetry detection. So these are the two problems I've alluded to earlier, but these are actually polynomial time equivalent. It's not quite obvious. So you need to argue stuff here, but also in practice, these two problems are actually quite similar. And during this talk, I'm just gonna switch around between the two whenever it's more comfortable to talk about graph isomorphism or automorphisms. And okay, the way to read this slide is if there is an arrow here, this means polynomial time reduces to. So there are sort of more related problems that are close to graph isomorphism or related to graph isomorphism. But the only thing I want to say here is that you've probably heard of the breakthrough result of Babai. And what it actually shows is that all of these related problems are quasi-polynomial time equivalent. Can be solved in quasi-polynomial time. And the major open problem in this area is whether graph isomorphism can be solved in polynomial time. Okay. So really, this quasi-polynomial time, it sort of suggests that these problems are not NP-complete, because we would not, for example, expect SAT to be solvable in quasi-polynomial time. And so this maybe sort of raises the question, is graph isomorphism actually easy? So is there even something to do? And there's some evidence for it. So for example, asymptotically, almost all graphs can be solved using a trivial linear time algorithm. So on average, graph isomorphism is easy. If you pick a random graph, you can probably solve it very easily. And on top of that, for many restricted graph classes, there's polynomial time algorithms available. So for example, for graphs of bounded degree, graphs of bounded tree width, and this list is very, very long. So there are lots of restricted graph classes known for which you can solve the problem actually in polynomial time. So this is sort of also this intuition that for these algorithms, most graphs are actually easy and the hard cases are more rare. And it's sort of the intuition for these problems. Okay. But it should be noted, so I want to talk about practical algorithms, that with very few exceptions, these specialized algorithms, they're not used in practice. So they're more related to some other kind of theoretical framework that's not really practical. Okay, so what are the practical algorithms?
So they're just not efficient, or they're just too convoluted, or don't know, but we don't need them because simpler algorithms work in practice?
So usually the simpler algorithms just work in practice, so there is no need for like more complicated algorithms, but also they're based around more of a group theoretic framework, which just comes with a lot of upfront overhead and really significant, and it's not trivial to think about how this would map into practice. Yeah. Okay, so here is some incomplete list of state-of-the-art practical graph isomorphism solvers. So all of these can do symmetry detection. And yeah, I just want to talk about them a little bit. So this first algorithm here, Naughty by Brandon McKay, almost been released 50 years ago, still receiving updates today. So like a few months ago, there was a new update. And so this is basically the grandfather of all of these other tools. So all of the other tools take a lot of design cues from this algorithm. So it's a historically really important algorithm. And today it's still really efficient on like very small graphs. So when there's like mass testing of lots and lots of graphs, this algorithm is really good. Maybe next algorithm here, saucy, has been designed with Boolean satisfiability in mind. So it's like really efficient on like large practical graphs that have lots of symmetry. And so it has been designed with a specific purpose. Another algorithm I want to talk about is traces by Adolfo Picano. Really special algorithm, it's highly engineered, there's lots going on in there. And we're gonna talk about it more during this talk. And obviously this last one I'm also gonna talk about. Okay, maybe there's an obvious question here, if you're a practitioner. So which one of these is the best algorithm? So which is the fastest one? Which one should you download if you want to do symmetry detection? And actually, okay, I'm super biased. So maybe I should not be trusted with this question. So let's forget about this last over here. Let's just talk about the others, right? And I should also maybe take a slide to talk about how to test these tools. So in like SAT or MIP, we have like benchmark suites. So standardized benchmark suites from competitions or other things where people have thought about what like a well-rounded benchmark suite is even supposed to be. And we should also do that for graph isomorphism because it has lots of different applications and they lead to many different inputs. And these inputs are also the difference in structure really matters. So a good strategy for one type of input may not be a good strategy for another type of input. So we should really think about having a well-rounded benchmark suite. Okay, so in my opinion, there is a sort of standardized benchmark suite which has been put together by Brandon McKay and Adolfo Picano. So it basically collects lots and lots of graphs from like previous graph isomorphism publications, and it's on their website. And this is what I consider to be the standardized benchmark suite. Okay, I make some adjustments to it. So I add some more graphs usually, and this is how I test the tools. So I have like a really large benchmark library, And so let's just run the tools and see what happens, right? Okay, so how do we read these graphs? So I'm comparing here now traces to like 3 of the other solvers, saucy, nauty, and bliss. And so if a point is below the diagonal, then traces is faster. And if a point is above the diagonal, then the other tool is faster. What do we see here? Well, it's kind of all over the place, right? So there's a lot of points above the diagonal, lots of them below, and it's sort of you can't really tell which one is faster. There's also lots of timeouts on one side, lots of timeouts on the other side, and for all of these tools. Maybe here you could argue that this is faster. Anyway, so we need to look more closely at these results. Maybe not all of the benchmark instances are equally interesting, so I have to look more closely, but don't want to do too much weather reporting. So let's maybe just summarize it. So compared to the other solvers, in my opinion, traces is fastest on most interesting graph classes, in particular on difficult graphs. So it's actually has stunning performance on these graphs, and it's super fast. But there are lots of interesting classes where it's not working well. So in particular for large practical graphs, traces often runs out of memory and crashes, which is not good. And on like particularly difficult graphs, so on like the worst graphs that we have, it's also not good. So actually there is not one solver that works well across all graphs. So even the best one does not work on all types of inputs. This sort of raises 2 questions. First of all, can we sort of pinpoint what makes traces fast on like most inputs or like difficult inputs? And can we do even better? So can we get rid of the cases that don't work well? Okay. So in order to do that, I have to start talking about how these algorithms even work. So what do they even do? Now, okay, on a basic level, they first do what's known as color refinement. What's the idea of this algorithm? The idea of this algorithm is that now, if you look at the definition of graph isomorphism, you can sort of really easy to say that you can sort of really easily see that if 2 vertices get mapped onto each other, then their neighborhoods must also get mapped onto each other. Just because graph isomorphisms have to preserve the edges, so they must preserve the neighborhood of each vertex. In particular, this means that if 2 vertices have a differing degree, so for example, this one has degree 1 and this one has degree 4, then these 2 vertices cannot be mapped onto each other by an isomorphism. No, the idea is that in the first round, we count the degrees of the vertices, and then we distinguish the vertices according to their degrees. So we sort of record that they have a different degree. And we record this using colors. The meaning of these colors is that an orange vertex can never be mapped to a red vertex. And this is fine because they had a differing degree in the round. So we've actually not lost any isomorphisms, we've just slightly simplified the problem. And then we just do it again. But instead of just counting the number of neighbors, we now count the number of orange neighbors, the number of red neighbors, the number of yellow neighbors, and so forth. And the idea is that, well, if this orange vertex here has a red neighbor, and this orange vertex here has a blue neighbor, then these 2 vertices cannot be mapped onto each other, because we would have to map this red neighbor to the blue neighbor. And this doesn't work, because we know that only equally colored vertices can be mapped onto each other. And then we just distinguish the colors further according to these neighbor counts, to this color degree. And then we just do it again. We again look at the neighbor colors, we distinguish the vertices, and we do that until we cannot refine the graph any further. So we've sort of simplified the problem. But we are not done yet. So, okay. What would be a desirable outcome of color refinement? So what would be the best possible outcome? The best possible outcome would be if the coloring was discrete. So if every vertex would get a unique color, then we would be done. Why? Because isomorphisms must preserve colors. And if you look at 2 discrete colorings, then you can just see, oh, I know the blue vertex, it must go to the other blue vertex here. and the light blue vertex, it must go to the light blue vertex here. And actually, you know how all of the vertices are mapped. There's only one potential isomorphism left if you have a discrete coloring. So if every vertex has its own color. So actually, once colorings are discrete, isomorphism testing is super easy. But it might not be discrete. So what do? We just force it to become discrete using backtracking. So this was the result of color refinement. What do? We choose one color that is not yet discrete, so one color class of size more than 1. And then we just try out all of the options. So on this left side, we individualized this one vertex here, so we gave it its own color. On the right side, we gave the other vertex its own color, and we just try out all of the options. And then we continue. So we pick the next color class, we try out all of the options, and we do that until the colorings become discrete. And now on these leaves here, it's sort of easy to check for isomorphisms because we can just try out the mappings. All right. But these trees, so let's not think too much about this for now. So these trees have very particular properties, and they're really important. However, to talk about these trees, let's switch to a model. So let's not bog ourselves down with like the graphs and what happens with color refinement. You can now forget about all of this. And I'm just going to start over and talk about a theoretical abstract model. And I promise you that it models quite precisely what the solvers need to solve on the individualization refinement tree. So it's, again, you can really forget about all of this. So what is this model? So call this model the black box search trees. And these black box search trees, they have very particular properties. So first of all, they have no node with exactly one child. Because it's a backtracking process, of course, when you backtrack, we sort of need to branch. It sort of just models this. The second thing is the leaves are colored. Now, these colors, they have a more specific meaning than before, and I'm going to talk about it. Okay, here are 3 examples. So this first one, okay, it satisfies the properties, obviously. It has no node with exactly one child, and all of the leaves are colored. The second one as well, it's kind of obvious. And this third one, it sort of breaks this first thing here, that it has no node with exactly one child, because there's this thing here. All right. Now, the algorithms for these black box search trees, they don't just get to look at the entire tree at once. They start at the root, and then they can say, okay, now I want to explore this part of the tree. And then sort of the oracle returns what's below this node. And then this one gets revealed. Then it can say, oh, now I want to go here. And then the next node gets revealed. And so these algorithms, they are only allowed to explore these trees one step at a time. They can't just look at the trees however they like. And the cost is the number of explored nodes in these trees. Okay, now you might be wondering why I'm not revealing this last node here. And that's because actually I know what this last node has to be. There is one more property that is really, really important. And it's called the complete isomorphism invariance. Now, what does it say? It says that if you have 2 equally colored leaves in these trees, then there must be an isomorphism of the tree that maps these 2 leaves onto each other. So if we have 2 orange leaves, there must be an isomorphism that flips around the tree and maps this orange leaf to this one. Now, this implies that this isomorphism must map this blue node to whatever is here. And since it must preserve colors, we know that this must in particular be another blue node. Okay, so this is what makes all of this interesting. Okay, so this raises the question, maybe we can explore these trees in sublinear time. Maybe we can always get away with not looking at the entire tree. Okay, but I first need to specify what exploring even means. So what are we even looking for in these trees? And for this, I define the isomorphism exploration problem. And the isomorphism exploration problem is just given two black box search trees, do they have any equally colored leaves in common? Or just to rephrase this, are they isomorphic? So you start out with two trees, and how can you solve this problem? So here's a really simple way to solve this. In the first tree, we go down to one arbitrary leaf. So here it would be a red leaf. And then in the second tree, we just look for this red leaf using depth first search. So we start by going down to one arbitrary leaf, and then we just explore it in depth first fashion. So we go here, then we go down here, and look, we found a red leaf. And they are actually isomorphic. So this is depth first search. And when you think about it, it's kind of easy to see that depth first search will run in linear time. Now, linear time, we should recall that these trees, they actually model these huge backtrack, potentially very large backtracking trees. So linear time actually means linear time in the size of the backtracking tree of the actual algorithm. So this is not really linear time, it could be exponential time. Okay, I promised you that this models something that the practical algorithms actually do. If that's the case, then I should be able to tell you how these practical solvers actually solve the isomorphism exploration problem. Now it's actually really easy because most of them just use depth first search. They use precisely what I've shown on the last slide. Go down to one leaf and then they look for this leaf using depth first search. They're slightly more clever about it, but it's basically depth first search. Okay, so there's a particular one left here. So the one I claim to be the best, and that's really special. And indeed, it solves the isomorphism exploration problem differently. So it uses breadth first search, random walks, and then another special traversal strategy. So it really engineers this isomorphism exploration problem. And okay, so when you think about it, if you analyze this, it will turn out that it's still linear time. So breadth first search is linear time, and this very special thing in the worst case will also be linear time. There's something to this. So in particular, the use of randomization can actually be quite helpful in these trees. I mean, it's not even difficult to see. So here's another way to solve the isomorphism exploration problem. And it's a Monte Carlo algorithm. So it's randomized. It can make errors, but we have to make sure that it doesn't make too many errors. And how does it work? We start off with two roots, and we only do random walks of the tree. So we do a random root to leaf walk in the left tree, and then we do one in the right tree. If it loads, yeah. We do one in the right tree. And then in the left and in the right. And we just continue the process. And what we are waiting for is repetitions of the leaf colors. And either these repetitions start to occur within the trees, or we see a repetition across these two trees. Okay, I have to go on. So we just continue random walks. Now we've seen a repetition here. So there's an orange color repetition. Just continue. And okay, in this case, we found another orange leaf on the right. So we've determined they are isomorphic. Now, how can we turn this into an algorithm? We need one observation. And it's if these trees are isomorphic, then these repetitions are equally likely within one tree or across the tree. So it's always so whenever we see a repetition, it's a coin flip, whether we saw one within the tree or across the trees. Because they're isomorphic, and the random walks, they don't care how you order the tree, because it's random. So each time we see a repetition, it's a coin flip whether we found an isomorphism or not. And given an error probability, you can very easily turn this into a Monte Carlo algorithm by just raising the number of repetitions you'd like to see. So if you wait for 10 repetitions, you can be quite sure that, the graphs are actually not isomorphic. Now, okay, I should also say that if they're not isomorphic, it's of course impossible to see an isomorphism. So if they're not isomorphic, it will always say that they're not isomorphic. Okay. But I have not argued the runtime. So how many random walks do we actually need to see these repetitions? That's actually also quite easy. You probably know the birthday paradox or collision probabilities when you're searching for hash collisions or something like that. And the question is, so the birthday paradox is, how many people do you need such that the probability is good that two of these people have their birthday on the same day? And the answer is roughly square root number of 360. And the analogy here is that, okay, the people, they are the random walks we explore, two birthdays on the same day, it's whether we have equally colored leaves, and days in the year, it's the size of the entire tree that we're probing. I should also mention that this also works if the, so this is a worst case assumption regarding the probability distribution of these birthdays. So it's not equally likely across the year when people have their birthdays, so it might be more likely in the spring or whatever, and still this is like a worst case assumption. And this is why this immediately translates to the setting. And so if you fix an error probability, using this approach, you can actually solve the isomorphism exploration problem in roughly square root of n size of the trees. Okay, there's another log factor here. So there's a few more things you need to do. So if these trees look very differently from each other, you sort of have to make sure that you're not investing too much time on the random walks itself. So there's like a doubling strategy there. But you can very easily turn this into an algorithm that runs in roughly this time. So we can actually solve isomorphism exploration in sublinear time if you allow me to do maybe some errors. Okay. But I know you don't like the error. So you want to do it without error. It's a proof logging workshop. So don't want to do errors. Here's the deterministic idea. Okay. So the idea is that we explore the trees like this. So we go down, so in this left tree, we go down to one node on a certain level. And below this node, we explore the entire subtree. So we explore everything that's below the node. And in this right tree, we explore everything up to the level where this node is at. And then for each of the nodes at this level, we go down to one arbitrary leaf. Why is this correct? So if these two trees are isomorphic, then the isomorphic counterpart of this node must have been explored on the right side, because we've explored all of the nodes up to that leaf. Okay. For this isomorphic counterpart, we went down to one arbitrary leaf. But this arbitrary, the isomorphic counterpart of that leaf must have been explored on the left side, because we've explored everything on the left side. So you can sort of split these trees and do a deterministic test of whether they are isomorphic or not. And this does not make errors. It's a deterministic strategy. However, the runtime, of course, depends on how large these things actually are. And it's not really clear that you can always find a split that is like fairly balanced, where like these things are roughly of the same size, and ideally they should be of size roughly square root of n. Okay, so can we always find these splits? And turns out, yes, if the trees have bounded degree. So if you can bound the degree of the trees, there always exists such a balance split, which is roughly square root of n. And so here's the way to see this. It's actually very easy. So if we go down to a particular level, which is of this size, so it's 4 times square root of, it's larger than 4 times square root of n, and smaller than 4 times d times square root of n, and here this is where this d comes in. So if we go down to a level of this size, and so this triangle is now square root of n size, roughly. And now if we try to attach subtrees of size square root of n, or 2 times square root of n, then we can sort of not attach too many of them, because otherwise we exceed the size of the tree. So if we try to attach, like to 1/4 of the nodes, if we attach a subtree of size 2 times square root of n, then actually we've reached n, which is the size of the tree. And this just means that the random node at this level will give you a balanced split of the tree. So you can, so if you are given this level, if I tell you where that level is, you can make this work. You just guess a random node, and then the expected worst case runtime will be of this roughly square root of n size. Okay, but the actual algorithm is more involved because you are not given this level. You don't know where that is. And the trees could look very, very different from each other. And then there is really work to be done here and stuff to be argued. But this is the main idea. And you can turn this into a sort of Las Vegas algorithm, so a randomized algorithm that doesn't make errors, which has an expected worst case runtime, again, roughly in square root of n, but also times the bounded degree t. Okay. And actually, so within this model, so within this isomorphism exploration model, we were also able to show lower bounds. So we also have a lower bound in the unrestricted setting and a lower bound in the restricted degree setting. And okay, these are not matching because here are logarithmic factors and there's no d, but they're close to matching. So they're near optimal. And these lower bounds, they're not terribly difficult because actually the model is very restrictive. So we really specify how these algorithms are allowed to work on these trees. Okay, and the thing to observe here is that in the model, random is better than deterministic. So we have a deterministic lower bound of omega of n, and the Monte Carlo algorithm just breaks this and runs in time square root of n. And also, this sort of offers an explanation for like the traces performance we observed. Now, why is that the case? Well, traces sort of uses both of these strategies a little bit. So it uses sometimes some random walks of the tree, which enables it to detect automorphisms earlier because it has good probabilities. But it also uses the Las Vegas algorithm. Because I've mentioned this special traversal strategy, and what that actually is a split. It splits on the second to last level sometimes in the tree. Now, this is of course not guaranteed to be balanced, but it turns out to be fairly balanced sometimes in practice. So sort of this model also explains why traces works well sometimes. Okay, maybe the question now is, but is the model a good model? And okay, we could now also talk about whether it actually models these algorithms, but we would have to go into detail there. Maybe an easier question is, do the upper bounds actually translate into practice? Because I've sort of claimed that this Monte Carlo strategy is better than all of the other strategies. But can we also make a practical algorithm that makes use of this traversal strategy? And of course, this is the very deep rabbit hole I went down in to make this solver dejavu, which is a solver based on Monte Carlo backtracking. However, it doesn't just do Monte Carlo backtracking. Why? It's because this Monte Carlo backtracking, it's proven to be near optimal in the model in the worst case. However, most graphs are not the worst case. You sort of need to first reduce graphs to like the difficult core, and then maybe the Monte Carlo strategy works well. And I'm not gonna go into detail here. I should also explain how the Monte Carlo strategy for symmetry detection works, because I've not done that. Because in symmetry detection, you need to collect the entire automorphism group, and that's slightly different from isomorphism. However, it uses the Monte Carlo strategy. It does breadth first search. There's also details on how you save your automorphism. So it also does depth first search because of that. There's a preprocessor, and it also does restarts and in processing. Okay, if you work on like constraint programming or stat solving or stuff like that, the preprocessor doesn't look weird and in processor doesn't look weird. It's sort of how we usually approach things. However, in practical graph isomorphism, this is actually like novel. So only traces actually has a rudimentary preprocessing routine, but before there was no like large preprocessor with lots of strategies. And also none of the other solvers uses restarts or in processing or anything like that. And I think the reason why this works well here is also because of the breadth first search and Monte Carlo sort of thing, because you can use like intermediate results to simplify the graph and all of that. And a lot of work has gone into this. However, let's maybe not dive too much into the details now.
I mean, the only thing missing in this picture is the conflict analysis, right?
Yeah, people have tried that, but
you're comparing the combinatorial solving. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so does it work in practice? So here are the same graphs from before. Remember that before it was all over the place with these other solvers. Again, we should look more into the results. I should be talking about all of the different benchmark classes, but I think even in this picture, it's not close. Like there's lots of timeouts on the other solvers. So again, like above the diagonal, the other solvers faster, and below the diagonal, dejavu is faster, and it's I think it's not close.
What's your timeout?
Timeout is 100 seconds. But this does not improve in favor of the other solvers.
Okay, so it's like, and would that be 100 seconds? Like when people are solving this type of problems, like 100 seconds is what you have to spare roughly? Because it's like, you know, again, if we're thinking about, I don't know, stat solving, then you know you'd be willing to spend a few hours.
So this is precisely the timeout that breakid used at least a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So this was 100 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we can dive more into the numbers if you like later. Now, of course, there's nothing to complain about. This is all perfect, right? There's no more tough question. Okay, what about the error? Now, I've said it's a Monte Carlo algorithm, so it can produce errors, right? So what about that? Now, okay, so first of all, I should mention that the user can specify the error probability. So you can tell it what your how you're feeling about the error, how likely it's allowed to be. And also it has one-sided error. So the tool may miss a symmetry, but it will never give you a wrong symmetry unless there's bugs, of course. But and also I should mention that this is the right kind of error for most applications. So not all applications, but for most. So if you're exploiting symmetry, so if you want to use it in SAT or things like that, what this means is that, okay, maybe sometimes you're missing symmetry, but this can only result in your algorithm slowing down. It's not going to make it wrong. So you might be missing out on being able to exploit symmetry, but it doesn't make the algorithms wrong. So the downstream application. And okay, so what about these benchmarks? So how was the tool configured here? So it was configured with 0.1% error. However, whenever it could be compared against the results of the deterministic solver, no error could actually be observed. So in all of these benchmarks, there just were no errors. Okay, why is that? We would expect to see errors, actually. But it's not the case because it also often terminates deterministically. So the probabilistic abort criterion is not always invoked. There's actually good chance it's deterministic, I think. Okay, so maybe to summarize the big picture of this talk. So what was this talk about? So we started off with this practical observation that traces is super fast. It has these very special traversal strategies that enable this, and it sort of inspired this abstract model for the backtracking behavior of this tree. So we designed this abstract model to sort of model something in practice. And then we took this abstract model and we gave a near optimal solution of this theoretical problem. So we came up with these probabilistic strategies which solve the theoretical problem. And then we took the theoretical solution and turned it back into practice. So it inspired the design of the solver, which then gave us very good results in practice. All right. And okay, of course, if you are interested in like the code or more benchmarks, you can find everything on our website. Of course, everything's open source, so do whatever you like. Okay, maybe a little bit of a perspective. So what's left to do? So, okay, the Las Vegas strategy. It's not implemented right now, so that could be something to do. Also, I've not talked about graph canonization, which is another interesting problem in practice. However, this model that I've talked about and the probabilistic strategies, they don't work here. So it's a slightly different problem. We use similar techniques, but not all of the techniques translate. However, I still think you can use probabilistic methods to speed this up in practice. Not in theory, but in practice, just by computing the symmetries faster and then making use of the symmetries while doing graph canonization. All right. Another thing, so if you're actually working on an application which uses these tools, then the random generators that dejavu returns can be more challenging to use. So many group theoretic algorithms actually will work better using random generators, but many sort of more practical applications, they tend to be worse. And I think that's also down to their only being the deterministic solvers previously. So strategies are sort of tailored to the way generators are produced by the deterministic tools, and they've not been adapted to deal with random generators. This is something that I've been working on lately. Okay, then of course, proof logging a good idea for these sort of tools. So of course, for the Monte Carlo strategy, no, but maybe for these other ones, I'm not sure. Okay, another question. So if we have the symmetries, what's now left to do? So how do we make use of the symmetry? And this is a very challenging problem on its own. It's probably harder than doing symmetry detection. And but in the remainder of the week, we're gonna see some talks about this. So there's Bart Bogart's talk on Thursday and Joe Loney's talk on Friday. And I'm excited for these talks. And that's it for my talk. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, so for graph canonization, is it just that the error ends up on the wrong side of applications?
No, actually, this isomorphism invariance that we used to create these traversal strategies, you can't use that for graph canonization, actually.
Okay.
It's because in graph canonization, you are looking for a minimal leap in the tree and not these collisions. So you can't use collision probabilities, for example.
Okay, so if you give me something that is probably the automorphism group, there isn't a quick way of finding the minimum element in that group.
Potentially not. So
Okay,
there is,
right.
I should maybe mention this. So there are trees which are of exponential size in the original graph,
yes,
and have no symmetry. So they're completely asymmetric.
Okay.
So in that case, it wouldn't help, but in practice, it would help. So, yeah. Yes?
So the results you got about black box search trees, rely on this invariant came out the color refinement. Do you know if any other problems other than graph isomorphism are likely to be able to make use of this?
So, I mean, that's not a good answer, but these collision probabilities, they've been used in the group isomorphism problem before, but it's a subcase of graph isomorphism. So it's, but yeah, other than that, I don't know.
Markus, can you hear me?
Yes?
Why do you think that proof logging for non-isomorphism, in your opinion, is not such a good idea?
I think it might be challenging. So,
okay.
and I don't know, I'm not sure it can be efficiently done in practice.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you still have an error after a new method, but you have partial knowledge of the graph, could you like complete the graph to have the exact solutions? Would it be interesting to start from your partial graph?
Yes, that's how I would implement the Las Vegas thing. Would run like first the entire process, and then if it would end with the probabilistic criterion, would just take that part of the thing and do the Las Vegas on that. Yeah, because it also already determines sort of the hard part of the graph where you would like to probably do this this kind of traversal. Yeah, because everything else is deterministic, but not deterministic in the sense that it doesn't depend on randomization, but it does produce errors.
Have you tested like plugging this into, say, symmetry breaking for SAT solving, or this would be like future work?
I have been working on this. So I have been coding a symmetry breaker. All of that is sort of ongoing work. And yeah, I'm working on it.
Any teasers? Like, is
It works well, yeah.
it?
So I've actually, so I have, so these symmetry breakers, they look for specific subgroups sometimes in the automorphism group, and I've sort of plugged them. I'm sort of using individualization refinement directly to do that. And I'm skipping the part where we first detect the symmetries. I'm just trying to detect specific things using this approach, and I think that there's promising stuff to do there.
But when you would use these symmetries in a like what kind of in a SAT solver, say, what kind of symmetry breaking constraints would you generate? Like, because as you give me the symmetries and I don't care where they come from. I guess I could always say now given a bunch of symmetries, I would break them all with respect to Lex Leader.
Yeah.
Would this be like a good idea or a bad idea? Or you do something completely different?
So I'm not sure that, for example, the really random generators would work well for this, just because they are so for these Lex Leader constraints, the intuition is that you would like to have symmetries that are expressive and have like small support, and like in particular you want to have symmetries with small support, I think. And the randomization is not a good way to get these. It's probably the worst way to get these. So you probably always get generators with very large support. But I think there's ways to use algorithms from group theory to get smaller ones again, or to get like the interesting structure you want. For example, the random trier algorithm is also deeply inside this algorithm here. And you can use that to extract the kind of structure that you want, I think. But there is work to do, definitely. So.
Yes. So a question about individualization refinement. When you split a color class into two color classes, like how do you do this in practice if the color class is large? Because then there might be exponentially many ways to split this.
What? No. The way you split this is predetermined by the structure of the graph. So you look at so if you have there's only one way to split this. You count the neighboring degrees from that color class, and then you split it according to these degrees. There's no choices to be made. Or are you saying like the individualization part?
Yeah, the individualization part.
Yeah. No, you given a color class, you pick out. So it was sort of a bad example because it was a size 2 color class. But say it's size 3, you would pick one vertex and give it its own color. And you would do that for all of the vertices,
okay,
one after the other. And it's not like take all of the subsets.
Yes.
There was one question in the chat asking, suppose you get a bunch of symmetries that you found probabilistically, could you run then standard nauty or traces with those symmetries to get a speed up for graph canonization?
So I'm actually not sure if they feature this thing, but I think they do. I think you can pass a structure which already contains the symmetries. It's very unclear whether that will speed them up. We'll probably speed them up on like really difficult graphs, but not on, say, easier graphs with lots of symmetry or things like that, because there's more efficient, like sometimes it's more efficient to just detect the symmetries on your own than to have to analyze the structure of the symmetry that I've given you. That's often much harder. So it depends. So I would say for hard graphs, it could speed them up, yes.
Good. So let's thank Markus again. And we're having a break. So we're back after the break, continuing on the whiteboard.
more details, please?
All right. So this will be a little bit more dry than the other parts. I'm just gonna start with some definitions. And basically, my only goal is that we get to the point where this isomorphism invariance property that we use for the bounds and all of that, that they are sort of apparent why this stems from the process and all of the definitions for individualization and refinement. I want to go through them. Okay, so first, what we need as formal ingredients are, of course, graphs. So graph for me is a tuple, and there's a vertex set and an edge set, and I'm just going to assume that the vertex set always runs from 1 to n. Doesn't really matter what you choose as the vertex set, but that's what I'm using. And then the edges, they are just a relation on the vertices. And okay, what's not in here is I'm always going to assume that the graph is undirected, which means that this is a symmetric relation. And also, I don't believe in self loops, so there are no self loops in these graphs. Okay, so then another thing we need are vertex colorings. So I've talked a lot about coloring these graphs and all of that. So we need it as a formal object. And the coloring pi, for me, it's just a mapping from the vertices of a graph to some set of colors k. Now, okay, one thing I will sort of gloss over is that so if this coloring becomes discrete, so if every vertex obtains its own color, then this will be a mapping from V to 1 through n again. So at that point, it sort of becomes a bijection on the vertices itself. So once the coloring is discrete, this is a bijection, and then we can use it as a bijection as well. All right. Okay. Some more things we need. So we are talking about symmetry. We need notion of a permutation. And I will write these as phi. And these are, I should specify this more properly, but these are bijections on the vertices of the graph. So they just permute around the vertices of the graph. And so maybe another way to write this is that they are in the symmetric group. So symmetric group is just all potential permutations on the interval 1 through n. Anyway, so what I will have to do is I want to apply permutations to graphs and to colorings and to all kinds of objects, because this is sort of what we want to do when we're talking about automorphisms and isomorphisms. We are applying permutations to objects. And so let's define that formally. So first of all, what does it mean to apply? So I'm going to write it like that. So it's an action. So whenever, if you don't know this notation, read it like this. This is sort of illegal because this is a group action, and I would usually have to specify whether it's a left or a right action, but it does not matter in all of these cases. So what does it mean to apply a permutation to a graph? We just apply it to the elements of the graph. So we sort of just take the phi and we plug this in, basically. Okay, now what do these things mean? So whenever we apply a permutation to a set, we just apply it to the elements in that set. So we have some set S, and we apply phi, and that just means that we take all of the elements of S and we apply it to the elements. Now, what does that mean for the graph? Now we have all of the ingredients. When we apply a permutation to a graph, that means we permute all of the vertices around, like specified by the permutation. And then for the edges, we apply it to each tuple in here. So remember that this is just a relation. We apply it to each tuple. And then in each tuple, we do this again. We apply it to each element. So we apply it to, we have an edge, V1, V2. We just do this. And this just defines formally what it means to apply a permutation to a graph. Okay. Now, a thing to observe is, so regarding the automorphism group, so you can read this as the definition of the automorphism group. So if a permutation is in the automorphism group of a graph, then it maps the graph back to itself. What does that mean? That means that if you apply phi to G, it just is G again. So nothing happens. All right. Okay, so I think this is already the point where I switch to the slides. This is small. All right. Where's my mouse? Here we go. Sorry. I'm utterly confused because I don't know how the displays are connected. So let's maybe just do this. And now I can just do this. Okay. So now I want to go through the formal definition of this individualization refinement paradigm. So as I've said earlier, probably all of these solvers are based on this paradigm. Describes the backtracking trees of the solvers, and the ingredients are, so on a formal level, they are refinement, self-selector, and tree. Maybe confusing to how, slightly confusing to how I said it earlier. The refinement will also include the definition of individualization. So it's basically refinement under individualizations on a formal level. And so the definitions I give, they all follow this practical graph isomorphism 2 paper. Anyway, so what's a refinement? So on a basic level, refinement gets as input a graph G, a vertex coloring of the graph. So your initial graph can also be colored using vertex colors, and a sequence of the vertices of the graph. So okay, maybe a few more things should be specified. So this should be a non-repeating sequence of vertices. So these should be all different. And the refinement then computes refined vertex coloring. So it gives you, it just returns another vertex color. Okay. Now, the thing, so earlier I only talked about color refinement, but actually for individualization refinement, so for this whole framework, doesn't really matter if we're using color refinement specifically. It works for all different kinds of refinements as long as they adhere to these three rules. So actually, what we would have to do is we would have to show that color refinement adheres to these rules, and of course it does, but for the framework, you only need to understand this. So to the side. Anyway, so the three properties, I'm not going to do them in order. Maybe let's start actually with the third one. So we have this sequence of vertices, and what this is supposed to be is the individualized vertices of the graph. So these are basically the manual splits that you do. And so the third property says that the refined coloring, so the coloring that the refinement returns, actually respects these individualized vertices. So these individualized vertices must get their own color in this refined coloring. Okay, there's a time. Not worried about it. The second property, it basically just says that this is a well-defined process. So I would have to explain what the symbol means. It means that when you treat these two, when you treat the colorings as a partitioning, Of course, you can partition the vertices according to the colors. Then the partition that you get must be a finer partition than the one you started with. So you can only take partitions that existed before and split them apart. You cannot sort of do things that are, let's combine two partitions and then split them up differently. You are not allowed to do that. This is a finer partition than the one you started with. And this first property here, that's the important one. So this is the one that will lead to all of the nice properties that we use later. It's the isomorphism invariance of the process. But what does it say? It says that if you apply a permutation, so any permutation, to the result of color refinement, then this must be the same as applying them to all of the inputs. So what does that mean? It sort of means that whatever this algorithm computes, it only depends on the structure of the graph. It does not depend on the specific order that you gave it, because if you reorder it, it gives you precisely the reordered output. Okay, does that make sense?
It's a very basic question. So I should think of ref as a coloring. So it's like it's a mapping of vertices to colors.
A mapping of a graph, a vertex coloring, individualized vertices to a coloring.
Yeah, but the object I get back is basically a map from vertices to colors.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and then once I have this map, I guess I can also sort of in my head think about it as inducing a partition in the sense that all vertices mapping to the same color is somehow, because that's what we're using in 3, for instance, when we talk about singleton cells, that sort of then we're thinking of wrapping the, okay.
Yeah.
But then suppose I have a fully individualized, I don't know if that's the right terminology, like I individualized all vertices. Are you saying that like if I actually had two vertices that are, what happens if I have two vertices that actually are, you could swap them in any isomorphism, but you have to get a discrete coloring in the end. Are you somehow say that these two will always be colored in the same way, or is it when I view it as a partition, I'll see that they end up in sort of the partitions or the parts in the partition are somehow swappable, or is the question even making sense? Maybe that's the problem.
Let me try to repeat.
Yeah.
So you're saying if you have two vertices that are symmetrical to each other.
Yeah.
So if you have two vertices that can be mapped by an isomorphism. Let's say you're not individualizing some, for simplicity's sake. Yeah? Then what happens is that they must obtain the same color. Now, we can see this here, probably, if you think about it for a second. Now why does this hold? Because if
it has to hold because of one, right? Because
this
rep thing somehow commutes nicely with the automorphism.
Yeah, so no matter how you name these vertices, so you could, for example, if they're named 1 and 2, and you flip them, it must give you the flipped result.
What I'm a little bit concerned about, suppose I now just out of spite, I put them in mu, so you have to individualize on them, and now you're saying that they have to both get the same color and be singleton cells.
No, only the one you individualize, because this also gets flipped around, right? So if you rename 1 to 2, now you're individualizing 2.
I see. That's very sneaky. Okay, good. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was my concern. That's why rep carries all of these things around.
Yes. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so now if we look at an actual automorphism of the graph, we can see what happens to the first property. What happens is that, let's start on the right. So if you apply an automorphism to the result, you can pull this in just via this first property. And then because this is an automorphism of the graph, actually the graph and the coloring get mapped to itself. So when you apply an automorphism here, that means that you get the same coloring by just individualizing the different vertices. So you, did I say this correctly? It just means that you don't need to permute around G and pi. You only need to permute around the individualized vertices to end up in the result that's permuted by the automorphism. Anyway, I think it will start to make more sense if we go down in the process.
Yeah, I don't see why you're dropping phi everywhere except for the mu thingy on the far left, but maybe we'll become further down there. Yeah, like if you go left now, like why you could drop phi from everything except the no.
Why you can't drop it here?
Yeah, but maybe we'll become more enlightened later on.
No, that's easy to see. That's because so what I'm using from this step to this step is that it is an automorphism of the graph. And an automorphism of the graph, by definition, this definition I was not.
No, I see. For G, I'm fine, but what is it? You know, maybe I have some crazy coloring. Isn't that?
No, I was naughty here. So I should have defined automorphisms of color graphs. So actually, this should just say, so this is like, formally, this is an automorphism of the color graph G pi. So so it's called G pi.
Okay. No, then
yeah. So it's this, and it's this, and then it follows.
Yeah.
So I did not actually define probably this. So I did not define what happens when you permute a coloring. But when you permute a coloring, you just chain them. So you do this. You first flip around the vertices, and then you take the colors.
Mm-hmm.
Let's continue. So the next step in the process is, I have some notes on color refinement here. We can maybe talk about this later. So the next step of the process is the cell selector. Okay, what does that mean? So when we build this tree, we need to choose a color class where we are going to individualize the vertices. And this is what the cell selector does. So it takes a graph and a coloring, and this is going to be the refined coloring at some node in the tree. And then we want to determine in which color class are we going to do the individualization. Are we going to do the individualizations? And that is going to be this cell operator. It takes a graph and a coloring, and it gives you a subset of vertices. And that subset of vertices is specifically, so this is what property 3 says, it's a color class of pi. So it's just a color of pi. And we need to do this in this very specific manner. We have to do it isomorphism invariantly. So again, the result of the cell selector, so when you permute the graph and the coloring with any permutation, then the result of the cell selector must just be the result of the original computation permuted around by this permutation. So again, the result can only depend on inherent structural properties of these objects, and it can, for example, not use the names of the vertices or things like that. All right. And then this is supposed to mean that we are at the leaf in the tree. Talked earlier about that these leaves are discrete colorings, so there is no color class of size 2 or larger. And so in that case, it should give you the empty set. It's supposed to give you the empty set because we don't want to continue the process. This is where backtracking stops. But maybe another way to think about the cell selector, it's a bit like variable order in like SAT or constraint programming, because it tells you on which object you're branching. So if you have a variable, you're branching on a variable, but we are branching on colors. So this is like the variable order, and it also has similar effects in practice than like changing around the variable order. Can be really important.
So how do you tie break? So say you end up in a situation where you can't make a decision, you think everything's the same.
So the thing is, these colors are ordered.
Okay.
So I can,
you can pick the smallest color, right?
Exactly. So one rule, for example, could be I choose the largest color, and then I have to specify I choose the first largest color.
Yeah.
Or I just choose the first non-trivial color, things like that. Yeah. All right. Let's put the tree together. Now, the nodes in this tree, so this is going to be this individualization refinement tree, and in your head, you should think colored graph, then we color it finer and stuff like that. So this picture from earlier, but formally, these are just going to be sequences of vertices. So the name of a node in this tree just is the sequence of individualized vertices that I had to take to get there. So in the root, it's going to be the empty sequence. So this is what this first thing says. So at the beginning, we have not individualized any node, and then we add nodes to that. And how do we do that? So we first, in here, we apply color refinement. I should start from the beginning. So if we are at some node in the tree, I'm now going to specify the children of that node. And what are the children of that node? We first refine the coloring according to where we are in the tree. So this is just the mental image of what that node actually is. It's this refined graph according to the individualized vertices. And then we apply the cell selector that we're using, and we choose a color class to branch on in this refined color. So this is just what intuitively should happen. Okay. And then we have selected this color class, and then the children of the node in the tree are just the sequence of where we are in the tree, extended by this one more individualization. So we just add one more individualization to the sequence that we already have. And so this just formally matches this intuition. We start out with the empty sequence, and then we individualize further and further, however we need to.
Then the way you described it before, there was also some kind of, I don't know what to call it, like closure operation, in the sense that at top level, I didn't start with the graph and everybody colored the same, right? I actually ran color refinement like first. And I suppose, like, again, the way you described it, once I branch on, I individualize, I give V like a brand new color, then I could again run, color refinement. Or maybe I get crazy and I run level 2 or level K Weiss-Fowler-Lehmann or something. Like, do I this operation on like node level in between refinement steps? Do I care about what this is? Do I have to specify this as part of your model? Or could I, for instance, do no refinement also?
You mean for the theoretical?
Or no color? Yes. So yes.
So the refinement could be the identity, for example. That's a correct refinement. You could do k-dimensional Weiss-Fowler-Lehmann. It's also a correct refinement. It does not matter for this process.
It's just sort of at the individual nodes, whatever happened to the, like I can plug in color refinement or k Weiss-Fowler-Lehmann or whatever I like.
It has to be consistent. It has to be. You have to make this choice of which algorithm you're using isomorphism invariantly.
Yes.
Yeah, but then you can swap this around in principle. It has indeed also been tried. So people have tried using first color refinement and then two-dimensional Weiss-Fowler-Lehmann if certain situations arise. Things like that. That has been tried. Okay.
Oh, you're saying like what I mean, even like at different levels in the, if I know that I'm depth 3, as long as I'm doing refinement consistently at depth 3 everywhere, it could be, my crazy depth 3 algorithm.
Exactly. Okay. Now, of course, so in the formal thing, we are always running refinement from the start. In the actual implementation, we of course don't do this. We use the refined coloring of the previous node. So there's just a formality difference here. But you could do this as well. It's just probably stupid. Anyway, so here's the picture again from earlier. Just want to show some things. So this up here would be the name of the node. So at the top, it's the empty sequence. Then this is the refined coloring with color refinement. Then the thing that's marked here, that's what the cell selector chose. So this is cell of this coloring. It gives you this color class. And then we branch on this color class. We, append this to the existing sequence. So here we get 6. We've individualized 6. You get 7. We individualize 7. And then we repeat the process. So then we plug this refined coloring into the cell selector. It gives you this cell here, and then you go further, and you get these 4 different discrete colorings of the graph. Okay, so one thing to observe here, we can observe the properties in action. Now, to look at this graph, it has exactly 4 symmetries. So it has the identity, doesn't do anything. It can flip these 2. It can flip these 2. And it can do both of these at the same time. So it's 4 symmetries. Now, look at the leaves. Let's fix one leaf. Let's just say this is the leaf we're comparing to. Now we can actually read off these 4 symmetries down here. So again, if you remember my image, for discrete colorings, there's only one option left to map. So we map blue to blue, we map white to white, orange to orange, and so forth. And then you can see, if we compare these 2, everything stays fixed, except these 2 get flipped. So here's a flip. So this is precisely this first symmetry. Okay, now maybe the first symmetry is comparing it to itself, and that, of course, is the identity. Right? Then if you look at this one, you can see that this one stays in place, and these 2 down here get flipped. And if you look at this one, it does both flips at the same time. So you can read all of the symmetries from the leaves of the tree.
And one level up, I can see one of the swaps.
I mean, you cannot read the symmetry directly here, but you could. So if you know that here's a symmetry.
Oh, I have to go down to like the bottom really to see. Like I was curious whether I could see one level up that already 6 and 7 are swapping, but you're saying no, I have to go down to the bottom of the tree to see it.
So there is techniques to do this, which would work in this case, because you can there's this notion of matching colorings. It's because these 2 color classes are actually precisely the same in these 2. And it's more difficult to explain, but there are techniques to try to detect symmetries further up in the tree, because, of course, that is faster. And so basically, we're trying to map the graphs partially, however, they were already determined and extended to the identity on the rest. And that also gives you really small symmetries, which are super nice to work with. So, but this goes into the trick territory.
I see. Although one thing that I'm worrying about a little bit, but maybe this is prematurely. Again, if we're running this on the complete graph, I don't like the size of the tree I'm getting.
Of course, yes. Yeah, we have to get to that. Okay. So now we're there. Let's first just observe that this property of isomorphism invariance, it holds for the tree. Now, I don't want to argue this, because it just follows directly from the definition of refinement and cell selector. So if you have, so this is our tree for the graph. So I've dropped cell and ref now, but you know, they can be fixed. So let's look at the tree. Now we apply a permutation to the tree. What does that mean? That means we rename all of these vertices. So the vertices in the tree are the sequences, and applying a permutation to it, in my view, just renames these sequences according to the permutation. Now that must be the same as making the tree from the permuted graph to begin with. And again, why does this hold? This holds because this holds for refinement and for the cell selector. So you can just do an induction and see that this property holds on the first level because it holds for refinement and cell selector. And so it holds on the selected nodes. And then the induction just continues, and this property holds for the entire tree. Okay. Important part to observe is first define like a subtree of the tree. So let's say that P, pi, nu is the subtree the subtree of the entire tree rooted in some node nu. So I pick some node and I just look at the entire subtree of that node. Okay, so I'm just taking a subtree. Now, if nu is a node of the tree and we choose an automorphism of the graph, then actually nu permuted by phi is also a node of the graph. Now, why does this hold? Again, because it holds for refinement and self-selector. It's just, or you can also see this from this lemma up here. Now, that means if you are in the tree and you have an automorphism, you can jump around in the tree using that automorphism. So if you have some node and you have an automorphism, you can apply the automorphism and you will get a node of the tree again. And it's also sort of what I showed at the leaves. So you can read the automorphisms in the tree, but you can also do it in reverse. You can, if you have automorphisms, you can go from one leaf to another using an automorphism. These two things are just related to each other. Okay.
But the automorphisms are what I'm trying to find ultimately.
Yes, but for example, in the complete graph, you determine some automorphisms. You don't want to continue exploring all of the automorphisms if they're already generated by what you've already seen.
Mm-hmm.
So you can also.
Okay. Oh, so you're saying, okay, so because a lot of badly formed questions from myself, but like suppose I somehow go deep in some branch and discover lots of interesting stuff somehow, then I can sort of mentally inside my head already reconstruct other parts of the graph because I know I could have like,
yes,
via this automorphism, I could have walked in similar ways.
Yeah, precisely what you can do is we can define like a rule. This is how we usually do it. If you have some node, and let's say you already have like a, so let's say you have some set S already discovered. So these are already discovered automorphisms. And let's say lies in our already discovered automorphisms, then you can just choose any node in the tree and cut away its isomorphic counterpart. So, okay, this assumes that this is the identity, because you shouldn't like be able to cut everything with the identity. That doesn't make sense. But if it's not the identity, you can just choose any node in the tree and cut away its symmetric cousin, so to speak. So I should probably argue why this is okay. Have I shown enough?
But intuitively, we're just saying that you don't have to explore it, because if you explore this other branch, you'll be able to sort of reconstruct whatever it was.
Yes. So the idea is sort of, so assume we need to fix the leaf. So assume we fixed some leaf and we've cut away, fix some leaf here, and we're trying to find all of the symmetric cousins of this leaf in order to find all of the automorphisms. And let's say we cut away like some E by I or something prime using this rule. Or actually this is not the correct way to do it. We could have chosen some prefix here, which we've cut away with a different symmetry. So actually there could be some T prime and tau prime, and we've cut this one away using some, we've cut this one away using some automorphism of the graph that we already have available, and this also cut away this occurrence here. Now the idea is that if you look at T prime times, oh, okay, I have to argue that I can recover this one using other symmetries of the graph, and this one that we've used to cut it. So I want to say that S plus all of the remaining symmetries in the tree generate the entire automorphism. So I cut away this one up here using this symmetry, and the idea is just we take the inverse, which takes us out of the tree that we've pruned. So it gets us in here, and actually this here I can write as, so this will be, let's say this is just fine. This is an automorphism that we will still find in the unpruned part of the tree because we are not in here. And we can recover this one by just by just multiplying phi prime again. So we just take this one, apply phi prime, and this will give us this one. We can always recover the automorphism in the cut part. And this also works if you apply this repeatedly, then you just have to apply this repeatedly, and because you only have finite number of automorphism pruning, you will always get to a point where you've not cut the tree. But this is explicit automorphism pruning. So usually the way this is done in these algorithms is actually in a very specific manner. When you do depth first search, you can sort of true. You can do most of this by just keeping an orbit partition, actually, in case you know what that is. Anyway, what I actually wanted to talk about on my slides maybe later. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the tree model again, but now it's not really the tree model. I'm actually talking about the trees. And you should just remember now for these discrete colorings, we can find the automorphisms. So at the leaves of the tree, we can really partition the leaves into the ones that are isomorphic to each other and the ones that are not isomorphic to each other. And a thing to note here is that if you fix the leaf, then what should it say? So if you fix a leaf and you apply the automorphism group to that leaf, you truly get all of the automorphisms. So in a sense, if this succeeds, if we call this an occurrence of a leaf, so we test all of the leaves against each other, and if they are symmetrical to each other, I will call this an occurrence. And actually, each leaf has precisely automorphism group size number of occurrences. So whichever leaf you fix, you will find all of the automorphisms using that. But there can be incomparable leaves, but all of these will always result in all of the automorphisms. That is all I want to say. And I think this is enough to see that this random traversal actually works. This is what I was trying to get at. So here's an example tree. And so the idea is that you fix some leaf in the tree, and now you perform random root to leaf walks in the tree, as I've described before. And we want to wait for repetition. So we want to see another orange leaf again, and like this. And the idea is that if you do it like this, you only do random root to leaf walks, this will actually give you a uniform random element in the group. Now, why is that the case? It's because the probability to find each of these orange leaves is the same. Now, why does that hold? It's because if you do a random root to leaf walk, you can think about your potential choices. So if you are at this first level, so there's orange leaves in this tree, and in this tree. Now, why is the probability for each of these trees the same on this level? It's because these subtrees here, if there's orange leaves in there, there must be isomorphic to each other. So we can give a one-to-one mapping from the orange leaf we picked first to this other potential leaf, and the tree will look the same everywhere. So the choice to choose the probability to choose the specific subtree where the leaf is in is the same for every leaf. So we get equal probability for all of the leaves, which in turn gives us equal probability for all elements of the automorphism group. So it gives us a random element of the automorphism group. Now, why is that good? Because we can make this, we can turn this into an algorithm for finding the automorphism group. So we use these IR walks for uniformly at random picking an element of the automorphism group.
But you might pick bad samples also. So you're just going to do a bunch of random walks, and then when you find your first collision, that's when you know you have a good sample and you found some non-trivial.
Yes, but so when we think about it, we can just say, okay, we fix one leaf and we compare everything we find to that one leaf.
Yeah.
But in reality, I can just like save all of the leaves I found and
Yeah.
compare to all of the leaves that I've previously found.
Because you don't know, I mean, you're assuming that you're comparing against a good leaf, right?
No, all leaves are good. So
Leaves are good?
yeah, so I've said here that I've fixed one leaf, but I don't need to fix one leaf. I can just collect more and more leaves and compare to all of them at the same time. So if I find the first blue leaf, I can also fix this first blue leaf and compare all of the blue leaves that I find later to this first blue leaf.
Mhm.
What I can't, what I shouldn't do is I shouldn't keep two orange leaves and compare all of them to the orange leaves, because that will bias the automorphisms you find. So. And this is also what gives the collision probability. You have to collect more leaves to get the collision probability, which is square root number of n. Okay, now how can you turn this into an algorithm for getting the entire automorphism group? Well, this basically is a random Schreier algorithm, in case you know this. So say we have already found some set S, which is not yet the entire automorphism group if we exhaustively apply composition. So the group generated by this set S is not yet the automorphism. Now, so this is very basic group theory. This is also a group, and it's specifically a subgroup of the automorphism group. And if it's a subgroup, it must have at least index 2 in the other group, which means that the actual automorphism group must at least be twice the size of the group that we've already discovered. So if we've not yet discovered the entire automorphism group, then if we sample an element of the automorphism group randomly, it will only be in this thing that we've already found with probability at most 1/2. So we've boiled it down to a coin flip again, which is nice. So if we just sample random elements and all of them are successfully determined in the part that we've already found, then the probability that we've actually not found the entire automorphism group is can be bounded by this term, which depends on the number of tests that we've done, because it's just E repeated coin flips that we've lost then, in a sense. And this is also why the error probability sort of scales nicely when you just add a few more samples. It's also the case that, so intuitively, once you start seeing these repetitions in the practical algorithm, the next ones will be even cheaper, because you've already accumulated this large set of leaves at that point. So finding even more repetitions just tends to be very cheap. Okay, so here's the sketch of the algorithm, which I think we've discussed. Perform random root to leaves walks. Okay, then this. Yeah, so one thing I should note is that if this test fails, we sort of need to be careful about, like, if we've sampled, so if we've started increasing this E in our algorithm, but then the test fails, we've sort of used up that error probability, and then we need to increase the E accordingly, and there are some things to take care of, but it's not terribly difficult. Also, another thing I want to mention, because this was also one of the original motivations to use random walks, is that this can also be parallelized. So these random walks, they are of course completely independent, so you can just parallelize this. Modulo one thing, it's like, how do we even test that an element is already generated by what we've seen before? And if you are really interested in this, we can probably take this offline, but this is where the random Schreier algorithm comes into place. And so what the solver does, it keeps a Schreier structure, and the Schreier structure is essentially an incomplete representation of whatever we've already discovered. And then this There's like a specific algorithm to then determine whether it's already generated or not. For the sifting algorithm, and then we perform that. And but if you look at this, it will turn out that the error like the direction of the error from this algorithm is the right way for us. So it will never say that it already is an element of what you've already found if it is not. So this is all again the right kind of error. Anyway, so I think that's all I have prepared. And yeah, just want to again mention that there's a lot more, of course, going on. And if you want to ask, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Any final questions before we head for lunch?
I have an evil question.
An evil question.
Yeah.
If
Oh.
your graph has a lot of vertices, but not a lot of edges, would you gain from searching symmetries and edges instead? Or would you transform your graph into the edges to search?
So the symmetries that you have to return must talk about the vertices, or at least that's what I assume. So I don't know how that would help you. So of course, if the graph is very sparse, there are particular things. So this is what the preprocessor is. You get rid of a lot of sparse structure very efficiently. There's really tailored algorithms for degree 0, degree 1, and all of that. And so.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.